what Nolan would have done or would do often?
No.
No, he wouldn't. Nolan was always taught to stay with the group. If you leave with me, you come back with me. So that I don't understand. And with me being a parent, if I was in that situation, I would have told him, you're going to get back on this boat with me because I don't want to have to answer to your parents if something happened to you.
Right.
So you're going to get on the boat. And if you still don't want to get on the boat, someone give me a phone so I can make a phone call to get your parents on the phone so they can tell you to get on the boat. But at no time will I leave someone else's child especially on the island.
So you think he got left behind then?
Yes. I don't believe he decided to stay on that island by himself. It just doesn't, that's not his character.
We just want to know what happened and why our baby didn't come home.
When Christine Wells finally held her son's phone in her hands, she knew immediately something was wrong. The messages were gone. The last words Nolan had typed before he died. The conversations from those final hours on the island. Deleted. Someone had gotten to this phone before it reached her. Someone had opened it, scrolled through, and erased them. And by the time she realized what had happened, her son's body was already being pulled from the water. 18-year-old Nolan Xavier Wells went missing after a July 4th boat trip to Horn Island off the Mississippi coast. His body was found days later near the same beach where he was last seen. The sheriff's office says there's no evidence of foul play. They say Nolan chose to stay behind on that island while his friends went home. But Nolan's parents, sitting with their attorney, say something very different. They say their son would never have done that. They say the story makes no sense. And they say that phone, the one that came back wiped clean, should never have left that island without him. For the first time since their son's death, Christine and Elmore Wansley spoke publicly about what they believe really happened. And what they said changes everything. This is the story of Nolan Wells. And nothing about it adds up. If you're seeing this case for the first time, hit that like button and subscribe to Crime Dive Network. This story needs to be told, and the more people watching, the harder it becomes to ignore the questions that still don't have answers. July 4th started like any normal day. Nolan Wells was a college football player at Southwest Mississippi Community College, balancing school and sports, with the kind of focus his parents had spent 18 years instilling in him. He had a Division I tryout scheduled for Monday, July 6th. 2 days after the holiday weekend, everything ahead of him pointed forward. He had plans. He had goals. He had a future. The night before, Nolan stayed over with a group of friends, the same group he'd be going to the island with the next morning. They'd done this trip before, multiple times, without incident. Launch the boat, spend the day on the beach, come home. Christine wasn't expecting a specific return time. This was Nolan's last break before school ramped back up. His father Elmore explained they wanted to give him breathing room before football and academics took over again. Nobody had any reason to think this day would be different, but it was. Christine said the hours passed normally at first. Nolan didn't check in. That wasn't strange. There had been other nights when he stayed out late with friends. That alone didn't set off alarm bells. Until the phone rang, 11:07 at night. Christine looked at the screen and saw Warren, one of Nolan's friends. And the second she saw that name, her heart dropped. Because Nolan's friends don't call her. Not like that. Not directly. If Nolan wanted to tell her something, he'd call himself. But his friends calling at 11 at night, that only meant one thing. Something had gone wrong. Warren told her Nolan was missing. He said he'd contacted the Coast Guard. Attorney Ben Crump would later point out, there are now discrepancies around whether that call actually happened the way Warren claimed. But in that moment, Christine was only thinking about her son. The explanation Warren gave was simple. Nolan had decided to stay behind on the island. He wanted to hang out with a girl named Katie. The rest of the group had come back without him. Christine immediately called her friend Tashima, whose sons had known Nolan since childhood. While they spoke, the boys who'd been on the boat started pulling up Nolan's location through Snapchat. Christine opened Life 360, the family's tracking app, and that's when things stopped making sense. Nolan's phone was showing up in one location. His car was somewhere else entirely. The phone and car had been separated, which meant either Nolan had left his phone somewhere intentionally, or someone else had it. And if someone else had it, who and why? Tashima said she'd retrieve the phone. That gave Christine and Elmore time to call the police. Except calling the police became far more complicated than it should have been. Christine started with the sheriff's department. They redirected her. She called Ocean Springs. Redirected again. She reached the Department of Marine Resources, who took her information and sent her back to Ocean Springs Police. It wasn't until Jackson County finally stepped in that someone said they'd take the case. By Christine's account, hours had passed since that first call at 11:07. Hours spent not searching, but navigating bureaucracy. And in a missing person case involving water, hours matter. Every minute counts. But those early critical minutes weren't spent looking for Nolan. They were spent figuring out jurisdiction. Meanwhile, Tashima tracked down the phone. It took time. After she retrieved it, she and Christine coordinated meeting up for the handoff. Later, they'd meet again to get Nolan's car from the house where the boys had stayed. And when Christine finally held that phone, the messages were already gone. Somebody had deleted them. Not after the phone reached Christine. Before. Somewhere between Nolan going missing and that phone making its way back to his mother, someone opened it and wiped it clean. The conversations from that day, the texts that might have explained what happened, gone. Erased. If Nolan chose to stay behind, if this was a simple case of a bad decision that ended tragically, why would anyone delete his messages? What was in those texts that someone didn't want his family to see? Christine and Elmore don't have those answers, but they have 18 years of knowing their son. 18 years of raising him, teaching him, drilling specific lessons into him. And those 18 years have left them absolutely certain of one thing. Nolan did not choose to stay on that island. Christine was direct. She said Nolan was raised with a non-negotiable rule. If you leave with the group, you come back with the group. She said if she'd been on that boat, and one of Nolan's friends wanted to stay behind, she would have said no. She would have told him to get back on the boat. And if he resisted, she would have handed him a phone to call his own parents. She said there's no version of events where she would have left someone else's child behind on an island. Not for any reason. When asked directly if she believes Nolan was left behind rather than choosing to stay, her answer was yes, no hesitation. She believes the story doesn't match who her son was. Elmore said the same thing from a different angle. He described Nolan as a silent leader, someone other kids respected and followed because of how he carried himself. On the football field, in the classroom, Nolan led by example. He was focused. He had a plan, and Elmore had spent years preparing him for situations exactly like this. Elmore said he told Nolan constantly, "Stay with your group, no matter what." He specifically warned him not to chase after a girl and leave his friends. "There are girls everywhere," he'd say. "She's not the only one. Stay with your people." He admitted Nolan probably got tired of hearing it. He used to tell his son, "One day, you're going to thank me for this." That call never came. Now Elmore is trying to make sense of a story that contradicts everything he taught his son. He said if 3 friends are leaving, and one wants to stay, those 3 should make sure the one staying has everything he needs. His phone, his bag. Even if it causes friction, you don't just leave. He put it simply, it's 3 against 1, maybe you argue, but you get back to the mainland, and either you're still mad, or by tomorrow you're friends again. Either way, you don't leave somebody on an island without their phone. Elmore does not believe his son volunteered to stay behind. He kept returning to the same point. Nolan had that Division 1 tryout in 2 days. School starting soon, a future he was working toward. If someone wants him to believe his son threw all that away to stay on an island chasing a girl he just met, purely on a whim, he doesn't buy it. Not for 1 second. Both parents acknowledged that mothers and fathers naturally want to protect their children. But Elmore said that's exactly why he's certain. He drilled these lessons into Nolan precisely because he wanted him prepared for moments where one bad decision could change everything. He raised his son to be smart, to think ahead, to stay with his people. And yet the story they've been told requires them to believe Nolan did the opposite of all that. Let's talk about Katie, because this is where the story gets stranger. Christine said the first explanation she received was that Nolan wanted to stay behind to hang out with a girl named Katie. But in that same initial conversation, Christine says she was also told that Katie herself was missing, and that nobody in the group actually knew who she was. Stop and think about that. The entire justification for why Nolan stayed behind hinges on this one person. But when Christine first hears this story, Katie is described as missing and unknown to the friend group. So Nolan supposedly decided to stay on an island with someone his friends didn't know, and then that person also disappeared. Later, more information complicated this further. According to Ben Crump, the young woman Nolan was talking to has said that Nolan told her he was heading back to the boat to rejoin his friends. But the friends on the boat said the opposite. They say Nolan told them he wanted to stay behind with her. Crump's response was blunt. Which is it? Somebody isn't telling the truth. Either Nolan told Katie he was going back, or he told his friends he was staying. Both can't be true. And if one is a lie, someone has given a false account of Nolan's last known words. That's not a small detail. That's the entire foundation of what supposedly happened. Now Christine addressed something important. Some public reaction focused on the fact that Nolan was traveling with friends who were mostly white, questioning why her son was even in that friend group. Christine's response was direct. She said she and her husband would never tell their children they couldn't associate with someone because of skin color. She said Nolan's heart was big enough to be a friend to everybody, and the outpouring of support, including from Nolan's friends, is a testament to how they raised him. If anyone has a problem with that, it's their problem, not hers. Christine and Elmore aren't interested in blame or racial division. Their focus has been on one thing: what actually happened during those hours on the island. Not who Nolan's friends were, but what those friends saw, what they did, and whether their story matches the evidence. And increasingly, it seems like it doesn't. There's a video. It's been circulating online. It reportedly shows an argument on or near the island that day. Ben Crump has described what the audio captures. He believes you can hear Nolan's voice saying something close to this. "Give me my freaking phone. What are you freaking doing?" When pressed on whether that voice has been confirmed as Nolan's, Crump has given slightly different answers in different interviews. But the core detail remains. There was an argument that day. It involved Nolan and at least one other person, and it appears connected to his phone. The same phone that would later be returned to his mother with messages deleted. So let me ask this. If there was a recorded argument over that phone, and Nolan ends up dead days later, and that phone comes back wiped clean, why is the sheriff's office still saying they see no evidence of foul play? What would foul play look like if not this? Ben Crump raised another point that's hard to ignore. Nolan Wells was a college athlete in excellent shape. By all accounts, a strong swimmer, yet he drowned. In water that wasn't particularly deep. On a beach that was full of boats and people. If Nolan was struggling in the water, if he was in distress, why didn't anyone notice? Why didn't anyone help? Being a strong swimmer doesn't make you immune to drowning. Rip currents are real. Exhaustion, heat, panic, all of it can turn a confident swimmer into someone in danger quickly. But the circumstances surrounding Nolan's death don't line up with a straightforward accidental drowning. You've got a young man with everything to live for, a Division I tryout in 2 days. A football season about to start. And you're being asked to believe he made a split-second decision to stay on an island without his phone, against everything his parents taught him, based on a girl nobody knew, whose account contradicts what his friends say. Then, hours later, he drowns in shallow water on a crowded beach, and nobody notices until it's too late, and his phone comes back with messages erased. Does that sound like a complete story? Or does it sound like a story with pieces missing? Christine and Elmore aren't investigators. They're parents who lost their son and have spent every day since trying to understand how and why. The answers they've been given don't satisfy those questions. They don't explain the deleted messages. They don't explain the contradictory witness statements. They don't explain the argument over the phone. They don't explain why a strong swimmer drowned on a crowded beach without anyone helping. What they've been given is a story. And that story, when you break it down piece by piece, has holes in it. Big ones. What we know for certain is this. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He was a college football player with a Division I tryout 2 days after July 4th. He went on a boat trip to Horn Island with friends, a trip they'd done before. That day, there was an argument involving Nolan and his phone. Hours later, his friends called his mother to say he was missing. They said he'd chosen to stay behind with a girl. That girl was initially described as also missing and unknown to the group. Nolan's phone and car were in separate locations. When the phone was recovered, the messages had been deleted. Days later, Nolan's body was found in the water. Those are the facts. Somewhere between those facts is a complete story. But that story hasn't been told yet. Not fully. Not in a way that accounts for every contradiction, every gap, every unanswered question. Christine and Elmore are still waiting, and they're not the only ones. This case has drawn attention not because of speculation, but because the known facts don't fit together cleanly. When you lay out the timeline, the witness statements, the evidence, and the official explanation, there are too many things that don't line up. Too many questions without answers. Until those questions are answered, until someone can explain the deleted messages, the contradictory statements, the argument over the phone, and how a strong swimmer drowned on a crowded beach without anyone helping, there will always be doubt. Nolan Wells deserved better. He deserved to come home. He deserved that tryout on Monday. He deserved the future he was working toward. And his parents deserve to know with certainty what happened to their son. Right now, they don't have that. What they have is a story full of holes. And the only way those holes get filled is if someone who was there decides to tell the truth. The whole truth. Not the edited version. The version that explains everything. Because the current version doesn't. And Christine and Elmore know it. And now, so do you. Being a strong swimmer doesn't make you immune to drowning. Rip currents are real. Exhaustion is real. Heat and panic can turn a confident athlete into someone in serious danger very quickly. But the underlying point isn't really about swimming ability on its own. It is about the fact that this happened in a crowded public place on a major holiday, and still somehow nobody came forward describing seeing Nolan in visible distress in the water. Even if the ocean took him, someone else should have seen him struggle. That absence of witness testimony is what makes the family's account even more specific and unsettling. Christine said that once she and her sister got access to Nolan's phone, they went through it themselves, looking for anything that might provide context. What they found was almost nothing. She said Nolan was constantly active on Snapchat. He'd sent her selfies, silly photos, a peace sign, a smile just to check in. That was his habit, his way of connecting. So when she opened his phone and found no saved photos, no saved videos, nothing at all from that day, it struck her as immediately wrong. She said her sister even checked his secondary account, also empty. And she pointed out something important about timing. They started searching his phone, before the 24-hour mark had passed. Since Snapchat content of that kind typically disappears automatically after 24 hours if nobody saves it, the expectation would be that digital footprints remained. If there had been anything there to begin with, it should still have been recoverable in that window. It wasn't. Ben Crump has said the family now believes both Snapchat messages and standard text messages were deleted from Nolan's phone before it was ever returned to them. Now, on the question of whether deleted data can actually be recovered, one legal analyst speaking on this case made a point worth repeating. He said he has personally helped prove a murder case before based entirely on deleted text messages recovered from a phone. His point was that deleting something doesn't actually erase it in most cases. It just hides it at various levels within the device that a proper forensic examination can often still access. Christine has said the family is now working with experts, specifically trying to recover both the deleted Snapchat content and the deleted text messages. It's worth pausing on why this particular detail carries so much weight for the family. Christine described Nolan's relationship with his phone almost as a running joke between them. She said his hand was practically attached to it, that he was always messaging her, always sending photos, always documenting whatever he was doing. For a phone like that, belonging to a kid like that, to come back completely empty with no saved images, no saved videos, nothing at all from an entire day at the beach with friends, isn't just unusual. To his own mother, it read as impossible unless something had been deliberately removed. And there's a broader legal wrinkle here too, one that has come up repeatedly as this case is developed. Text messages once sent typically pass through a carrier's network, and depending on the service may be stored elsewhere beyond just the device itself. That means even a successfully deleted message on a phone isn't necessarily gone from every possible record. Investigators or Crump's own team may still be able to request those records directly from the carrier or from Snapchat itself, entirely separate from whatever remains on the phone. But until that data surfaces, the silence on that device speaks louder than any testimony ever could. Here is a smaller detail, but one that matters because it is the first documented inconsistency in this case that doesn't rely on anyone's memory of a conversation. Christine said that after she posted publicly asking for information, a young woman reached out to her. This young woman had been on the island that day and told Christine that the official report described Nolan wearing black shorts, but according to her own photos taken that day, Nolan was actually wearing blue shorts. Christine said the young woman sent her the photos directly to show the actual color, and she says those photos do appear to have been taken that same day. Black and blue aren't colors you'd easily confuse in person or in a photograph. So this isn't a case of somebody misremembering a detail from a stressful night. It's a documented photograph apparently contradicting an official report on a simple, verifiable fact. Small as it sounds, that is exactly the kind of detail that raises bigger questions about how carefully this investigation's early information was gathered. If the clothing description is wrong, what else in the initial reports might be inaccurate? And why? This case has by now pulled in a significant amount of outside support. Civil rights activist and former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick helped fund the cost of the independent autopsy. Filmmaker Tyler Perry is covering the family's funeral expenses. Reverend Al Sharpton has also joined this case publicly, appearing alongside Christine Elmore and Crump at a press conference. And Trump, in discussing why the family sought an investigation independent of the state, invoked Mississippi's own history directly. He referenced the killing of Emmett Till, noting this is the same state where that happened as part of explaining the family's concern about how a case like this, involving a young black man and a group of white friends, might be handled. Trump has also said he hasn't personally spoken with the young men who were with Nolan that day because they have since retained their own legal representation. That last point is worth sitting with for a moment. It means at this stage there has been no direct conversation between the family's legal team and the friends who were actually on that island with Nolan. Whatever accounts have emerged from that friend group so far, have come second-hand through statements like Judge Cole's or through what investigators have shared. Crump's team, by his own account, is working entirely without direct access to the people who were physically present for Nolan's final hours. After one of these interviews, a panel of legal analysts weighed in and raised a series of pointed questions about how this investigation has been handled so far. One analyst focused on evidence preservation. She noted that the boys called Nolan's mother at 11 at night, but the phone itself wasn't handed over until sometime the following day. In any investigation, she said that gap is exactly when evidence gets lost or altered. She raised basic questions nobody seems to have answered publicly. Did anyone document whether the friends had changed clothes? Were there any scratches or signs of a physical altercation on anyone's body? Were those questions even asked in those early interviews? Another analyst raised a more specific legal point. If there is a recorded argument involving Nolan and his phone, and his friends left that island with his phone while he did not return with them, that arguably constitutes theft. And in a missing persons case involving a possible drowning, law enforcement routinely has tools available like exigent circumstances, warrants to compel phone carriers, or apps like Snapchat to hand over data quickly. He questioned why none of that appears to have happened here in the first several days. He also raised the chain of custody question directly. If the phone was in the friend's possession for a number of hours before it reached the family and anything was deleted from it during that window, that alone could support an argument of evidence tampering, regardless of whether the content itself turns out to be significant. There was also criticism of the sheriff's own public statements. Multiple analysts pushed back on the decision to say publicly this early that there's no evidence of foul play. Their point was that an active ongoing investigation this early should be described as exactly that, ongoing, rather than closing the door on a possibility before basic questions have even been answered. One analyst also raised something about the friend group itself. He noted that, from what's publicly known, some of the young men involved appear to have retained legal counsel without ever joining the search effort for Nolan. He said in his view, that detail alone raises questions. More than one analyst pointed toward what happens next. They expect this case to eventually move into civil court, potentially as a wrongful death or negligence claim, regardless of what any criminal investigation concludes. One analyst also brought up something worth noting about Judge Ashley Cole, whose son Warren was one of the friends on that boat. She'd previously posted her own detailed public statement defending her son and explaining her family's account of the timeline. The analyst's read on that statement was blunt. She said in effect that the judge was getting ahead of the story, building her own record early before more difficult questions could be asked. She wasn't accusing the judge of anything specific, but she said the timing and the framing of that statement were both worth noting. Taken together, the panel's overall message was consistent. Every piece of this, the delayed handoff of the phone, the deleted messages, the lack of an early forensic warrant, the sheriff's early public statements, all of it, they said, is the kind of evidence that tends to matter far more later in a courtroom than it might seem to matter right now, in the middle of an active investigation. If this case has uncovered layers of suspicion, do me a favor and hit that like button, and subscribe to Crime Dive Network. We cover stories like this because they need attention, and your support helps us bring you the truth as it comes down the line. So here is where things actually sit right now. The state medical examiner has already performed an autopsy. Officials say a full cause of death, including toxicology results, could still take time. Investigators have told reporters they suspect Nolan drowned, but that has not been confirmed as an official finding. The independent autopsy conducted separately in Washington, D.C., has been expected to produce results in a similarly short window. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter has continued to say publicly that his office hasn't found evidence of a crime. But he has also acknowledged in his own words that people want answers faster than a real investigation can move. He said, It will take real hard work to get this right. Trump, for his part, has raised the question of whether the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation should take over this case entirely rather than leaving it with the local sheriff's office. What we're left with at this point is a mother and father who do not accept the explanation they were first given. A cell phone that came back to them with messages missing from it. A documented photo that contradicts the official description of what Nolan was wearing. A video with audio that may or may not be confirmed as Nolan's own voice capturing what sounds like an argument over that same phone. And two separate conflicting accounts of Nolan's very last conversation on that beach. Nolan Wells was 18 years old, a football player, a son his father described as a silent leader, someone other kids naturally followed. A young man, his mother says, would never have chosen to stay behind alone on an island without his phone, and without a word to anyone about when he'd be coming home. His parents are not asking anyone to accept a theory. They're asking for a real investigation, and they're asking for it publicly because they say they haven't gotten straight answers any other way. There's one more thing worth sitting with from these interviews that I think captures where this family actually is right now. It isn't rage. It isn't even primarily an accusation against any specific person. It's something closer to disbelief, layered on top of grief. Christine described trying to protect her family, trying to protect her own peace. While strangers online treat her son's death as entertainment, Elmore described a young man he spent years preparing for the world gone in a way he still cannot make sense of. Neither of them has said definitively what they believe happened out on that island in the hours after 3 o'clock that afternoon. What they have said consistently across every interview is that the story they were first given does not match the son they raised. And until somebody can explain that gap in a way that actually holds together, they intend to keep asking questions publicly whether that makes anyone in Jackson County comfortable or not. We're going to stay on the story as the independent autopsy results come in, as those deleted messages are potentially recovered, and as this investigation, wherever it ends up, moves forward. We'll bring you the facts as we actually get them, and not a moment before. That's all we have for you right now, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe so you don't miss the next update on this case. See you next time, everybody.